the Talksport Fan Network.
The ultimate on-demand destination for the UK's best fan-led football podcasts.
Want authentic supporter insight on all things Bournemouth? Follow Up the Cherries in all departments on the Talksport Fan Network.
Club-dedicated content created by the fans, for the fans.
Search Talksport Fan Network.
Welcome back to Cherry Picking, everybody, and thank you for joining us. Now, before we get going, hit the likes and subscribe the bell button below. It does help the channel to grow. And do, after the video, check out our sponsors, Dental on the Banks. We do thank them for sponsoring and supporting this channel. Now, it wouldn't be cherry picking if I didn't have my main man next to me. And of course, that main man is Manny. How you doing, mate?
All good, thank you, mate. I've sort of, moved on, as it were, from the tragedy of Berlin, and it just, you move on, and thankfully the Southgate era is now over. A lot of mixed emotions. We still haven't gotten to the process of appointing a new manager as of yet, but I'm sure there will be some takers. And of course, barely a few weeks from now, I would say, or close to a month, we've got the Premiership coming back. And of course, there's a little matter of the Olympics having started.
Yes.
Argentina, of course, playing a rather exciting goalless draw with Morocco. Scandalous amount of stoppage time given, which robbed the Moroccans of a well-deserved win. Scandalous, I tell you. Back to Qatar World Cup settings, as it were. But if you can watch the Olympics football on the telly, I would suggest to all those who are watching and listening, please do. It is absolutely wonderful.
And this is the one thing, with the Olympics football, I actually really do like it. And the reason why I like it is because there is young players, up and coming players that are actually making their debuts in that tournament, trying to show exactly what they can do and bring to their national teams and their club teams. I think it's a really, really good thing. And this is one thing that's really irks me because, of course, Team GB took part all those years ago when the Olympics were in London.
Yes.
I just don't understand why we've not really put as much impetus into playing Olympics football. It is a competition, it's a sport, and it's also giving those young stars an opportunity to actually shine.
Well, I'll tell you why, because, this goes all the way back to the then Minister of Sport, Tony Banks, making a rather ludicrous suggestion that all of our national team sides should be scrapped and all British teams should be fielded. Conveniently forgetting that if you are, against British football, that is effectively what you'd want. Because that means that if you eliminate England, Scotland, Wales, and to some extent Northern Ireland, you effectively eliminate that much influence on the FIFA table.
Yeah.
And so effectively, not only would you therefore be forced to have a GB team which would comprise of England, Scotland, and Wales, but where would Northern Ireland fit into the picture? Would they be forced to choose between being a part of Great Britain, or would they go with with the Republic of Ireland? And as we all know, many Northern Irishmen and Irish women, of course, have the I should say Northern Irish folk, being gender neutral, politically correct. No issues. Many of them have the duality of being able to have both British and Irish passports. So that puts them into further turmoil. Now, I get that we obviously did have a GB team for the Olympics, and there's a part of me that believes that Stuart Pearce's decision not to pick David Beckham for that tournament cost us a medal. Because had we qualified for the semi-finals, I think we would have won a medal. It was Ryan Giggs who was captain, and Craig Bellamy, among others, who was in that team, if I remember correctly. And Jackie Butland, of course, I think was our goalkeeper.
He was,
but we lost in the quarterfinals, and we couldn't progress any further. But a big reason why probably, Craig, is that if you were to field a GB team for every single Olympic Games, sooner or later the tongues are going to wag and say, why don't you just have a full GB team? Now, in theory, you could very well say that it could be like the British and Irish Lions for rugby union, which get together every 4 years to take part in tours to South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand every 4 years. And so we could possibly do it that way. But then, once you start that, I think the fear is that once you start doing that, one thing would effectively lead to another. And as it is, when you take a look at Irish Rugby Union, it's basically comprised from the whole Emerald's Isle. So the Northern
Yeah.
Irish and the Republic of Ireland, they all get together, and so instead of singing Arman Nafin, the soldier song, they have an English language anthem called Ireland's Call, which they sing a lot more these days. So it's a lot of political ramifications, a lot of all of that stuff, a lot of red tape. And I would have loved to have seen our team, win a medal. It would have been wonderful, but it just wasn't to be. So, well, what you said about the Olympics is perfect. The idea of bringing in 3 overaged players to play along with the inexperienced and sort of guide them is also quite good. And it sort of has the stature of an under-23 World Cup, as it were. So it is fairly prestigious. And so, yeah, I'd like to think that there could be a compromise by which, just as the Lions have their rugby tour every 4 years, we get to field a GB team for the Olympics. But then, you're going to have this controversy of selection. And there's always going to be this misconception that if you have a GB team, it will effectively be Team England because you don't have too many young stars from the UK. That's a misconception. I think there is some great young talent in the UK. The only question is, could it be perhaps a reality? Could there be a compromise between the FA, the Scottish FA, the Welsh FA, the Northern Irish FA, and FIFA, for example?
Yeah,
it's a lot of politicking talk. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. And likewise, I'd love to see us take part in it, but I guess yes, there would be a lot of questions. There'd be a lot of questions towards FIFA, and of course, we don't want to ever lose England, Scotland, and Wales. And I know that there's all those Scottish fans that were hoping that Spain were going to win the final, and of course they did, and they all celebrated. But I actually I'd like Scotland to do well. As an English person, I'd like Scotland to do well. Likewise, I'd like Wales to do well. I'd like Northern Ireland to do well. Would I want it all combined? No, most definitely not, because it would just ruin that rivalry and that bit of fun in there.
Absolutely, mate. And I'll tell you something. Like you, I share this hope that our fellow UK home nations will do well. And the thing about having a British Isle home nation in the World Cup or the European Championship or any major tournament is that we all get behind them. In 1978, I think Chris from Leicester Fan TV might possibly remember this. I'm sure he will, actually.
Yeah.
We all got behind the Scotland team, Ali's army, who went all the way to the Argentine, and with the hope that they would all shake everything up and win the World Cup, because apparently they were the greatest football team. But they came an absolute crop in their first 2 games, got their act together against the Dutch, but by then it was too little too late. But everyone was behind them. And in 1994, when no UK team qualified, the Republic of Ireland under Jackie Charlton went to the USA. So practically all the everyone at the BBC and ITV were behind the Republic of Ireland, cheering for them. And I think most of those players were all playing in the English leagues anyway. So that you could say that there was some, some stake in that. I think one exception was Packy Bonner, the goalkeeper, who was with Celtic at the time, if I remember correctly. So yeah, I share your view. I want to see our home nations do well, but I also understand that there is that, that tribality with the rivalry. And I'll tell you what, I don't blame those Scotland fans for cheering for Spain, because when Scotland exited the tournament, and of course, I think Ryan Christie was, I think it was dropped from the Scotland team for that particular game against Hungary. And Scotland were attacking relentlessly, but then conceded a breathlessly late goal, and their dreams were crushed. And I ended up writing on my Twitter account saying that with fans like these, England doesn't deserve any success. And if we don't go far in the tournament, we deserve all the scorn that we can get. It's disgusting. Yeah. I mean, I'm proud to be an Englishman, despite not living in the UK currently. But I also consider myself a British patriot. And so in Euro 2016, I was cheering loudly for Wales, for Northern Ireland, and also the Republic of Ireland. I've got some good mates who live in Dublin, obviously. And a huge shout out to one of my favorite YouTube content creators, Derek Healy, better known as Del Boy Gunner TV. What's the crack? What's the bleeding story? And he could possibly be a guest that we could maybe bring on here, of course, if possible. So, Yeah, so I understand the rivalry, but for me, I'm also that type of person who believes in a shared friendship, as it were. And even if there is a little bit of banter, you know, I sometimes think that you've got to be willing to take it if you're willing to dish it out. So it doesn't really bother me that much, to be honest. No, and like you, I want to see other teams do well too.
Yeah, most definitely. Well, let's go on to something that, of course, does affect Bournemouth for this following season. It affected us last year as well. It also affects another 11 teams in the league. And there's been a bit more made of it with regards to this. And of course, AFC Bournemouth have got a new sponsor. So Dapperbet is no longer, and we are now sponsored by the very aptly named BJ88. But there's a lot more to this that I do want to discuss because I've seen a lot of stuff that's been going round, and there's a lot of criticism about, firstly, the hierarchy at the club, and not doing due diligence when they actually allowed this team, this company, to actually sponsor us. Now, the thing is this offer was 2 times bigger than the next closest offer. And that's something that's come from Chris Temple at BBC Radio Solent. I was trying to think of where we start with this. And I think let's start off with the name of this company. Now, I, d- I don't want to say what it stands for, the first part, and what people have been comparing it to. But there has been a number of fans being very, very disgruntled by the naming of this business, saying that it's a little bit of a meme. It's something that really is embarrassing. There was one female fan who went and put onto X, or Twitter as we like to know it, with regards to the fact that she wouldn't like to wear the letters BJ on her shirt, which completely understand, and it's completely viable. Um, the other part, though, of this, and I didn't know anything about this. In all honesty, I did not know anything about this, but there was a lot made about the numbers 88. Now, the numbers 88 in Asia are a lucky number. So it's known as a lucky number. However, in Europe, and in particular European countries, and again, like I say, I wasn't well versed in this and didn't know anything about this. The number 88 actually stands for Hail Hitler, which of
Yeesh.
course is a white supremacist slogan, which of
Yes.
course cannot be allowed in football. But of course, BJ88 is the sponsor name. Now, I know 100% the first part doesn't mean what everybody's saying it means. The 88 part is because it is a Bangladeshi company, probably means, the hope and prosperity, that part, rather than the European version. When companies do sponsor UK football teams, though, because of course Mansion also sponsored us, and they had M88 on 3 of the season shirts that, of course, they Umbro made for us. It was actually from the Umbro shirts that they actually started using M88. When companies do come to the UK, though, these betting companies, and we'll come into a lot more of the background behind them, but should they be forced to change their name based on how it could be seen as an insult, or do you feel it's right for them to use the actual name of the company as seen elsewhere in the world?
This is a very, very tricky issue, Craig. And I think if
Yes.
you were to talk to one of these people working at the company and tell them
Mhm.
you might need to change your name, um, I think their first instinct would probably be to tell you to go shove it, for want of a
I
more
think the question
acceptable
would be
word.
why? Why? Because I think there is no intention by anybody at that company for what that means in Europe.
But then that's the thing. You talk
Mm,
about due diligence, though. You talk
yeah,
about due diligence. Um, it's a two-way street. There's
yeah,
not for nothing that we say that. And when it comes to doing due diligence, not only should the people responsible at Bournemouth have done their due diligence to find out all the ramifications of that,
yeah,
but I would like to think that if, as a company, you are making a decision to try and expand your brand and go into the market, you also have to do your due diligence and find out if there are any ramifications on the meaning of your name. And
yeah,
what we see right here is a cultural disparity.
yes,
The very idea that a certain number 88 can mean two vastly different things in two
yeah,
different continents, I think it says it all. And if this particular betting company in particular is unwilling to, change its name because it doesn't believe that it has to sacrifice its own identity, given that its identity can be badly misconstrued, then, at the end of the day, you're going to have to come to an impasse and say, well, thanks for your offer, but we're going to no thanks. We're going to have to turn it down.
hmm
So there has to be a little bit of a compromise over here. And, the company is also going to have to accept that maybe the name change wouldn't be right. So, yes, we should criticize Bournemouth for not doing their due
hmm
diligence, but we also have to take a look at the company in itself and say, if this is the way it's going to be, construed, would it be worth trying to crack the European market, as it were? And never mind the fact that it's another betting company, and clearly you and I are sick and tired of all these betting companies having so much of a foothold, as it were, when it comes to sponsoring football teams. One of the biggest issues with Brexit, and this is me going political, I do apologize for that,
No, go
is
for
that
it.
we would see a lot more of an emergence or re-emergence of British companies and have them have a bigger stake in everything. But now, of course, we're seeing a situation where the money has been drying up, so it doesn't seem to be viable to use British companies. Otherwise, I'd definitely recommend a company like Waitrose, which sponsored the England cricket team for a period of time.
Yeah,
Why not? Why wouldn't they be willing to try and crack the football market? Why wouldn't a company like Pret a Manger, who recently had to shelve their plans to expand their operations in Israel due to the rightly done political backlash, why wouldn't they be eager to try and promote
mhm,
themselves as a healthy food alternative? I mean, you've got McDonald's and Burger King. To heck with all of those. Be
yeah,
healthy. Pret a Manger. And ironically, it was my brother-in-law when I went to visit him in London. He, of course, was getting married to my sister. I remember telling him as a joke that when it comes to healthy food, I always would prefer Subway any day of the week and twice on a Sunday.
yeah,
And his first word was, "Really? Go for Pret a Manger instead." And so I remember having that over there, and you can choose some really good sandwiches. I wouldn't take any drinks. I'm not too big a fan of coffee.
mhm,
But again, without digressing, there are so many other options for sponsorship, and it seems discomforting for me that betting companies are now more and more involved. And you also have to understand, if there are any players who are Muslim playing for the
mhm.
team, if memory serves, I wonder if I think there might be one or two players who are Muslim players at Bournemouth right now. Maybe Dongo Atara or one
Yes,
other
yeah,
two person. I don't know. Yeah. So you're putting them in a little bit of a spot. And you're
mhm,
also opening another can of worms by bringing the whole gambling paradigm back into the sport. We really don't need that, especially when we have the issue of potential match fixing going on. Do we really need to be brought back to those days? I don't think so. And mind you, that was when the likes of Ladbrokes and William Hill were ruling the roost. You
mhm.
bring more of these companies in. Oh boy.
The other thing as well, of course, is like you said there, the moral side of it, the match fixing, but it's also people's lives are being affected. Now, I don't bet. Now, it doesn't matter, what is on the front of the shirt. For me, the main reason being is I didn't ever use mansions or M88s. So, to actually mention the BJ88 part, we've already done that. We've already had M88. Wolves and Crystal Palace had W88 as well. I believe one of them has actually got W88 on their shirt as well. So there's got to be a lot to be looked at that. Or the Bournemouth fans got to go, right, okay, it is, a different culture. It does mean something completely different to what, has been mentioned on Twitter, X, Facebook, wherever. Now, the thing is, though, is gambling does ruin lives. It does. It's never going to ruin my life because, I didn't go out and see on the front of the Bournemouth shirt, Daffer Bet, and go, right, okay, I'm going to put £500 on, something on Daffer Bet. I normally have a pound accumulator, every now and again. Sometimes I even forget to do it. So that shows what sort of person I am. Could I bet more? Yeah, I could bet quite a bit more, but I choose not to. There is those people though whose lives gambling does ruin, very much like alcohol does. And funny enough, out of the three nasties, the three big nasties, which you would say is gambling, alcohol, and cigarettes, probably cigarettes is probably the one that is most censored, but also the one that nobody's ever got divorced over cigarettes. Nobody's ever, yes, it does have health ramifications, but that was the one that was targeted the most. Gambling does ruin lives. It does lead to people, firstly, some people can't stop and end up spending. I've heard this story before where people spend their entire wages, gamble it away, and they're broke by Monday morning and they've been paid on the Friday. Um, it does ruin lives. And that is why I personally, hand on heart, personally feel that gambling sponsorship needs to stop. But there is also a spin side to this as well, Manny, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it. Gambling sponsors do pay out the most. Now, of the 9 Premier League teams without gambling sponsors, 7 of them, and that is 7, are the top 7. The other 2 are Ipswich Town, who are sponsored by Ed Sheeran. Maybe that's a carryover from the Championship days. And, of course, Brighton and Hove Albion, who have got American Express, and actually probably the sponsor I'm most, jealous of. I'm most, I'd love a sponsor like that because it's a good sponsor. It's a sponsor that's actually invested in their stadium. The rest of us, though, the rest of the 11, is this the devil that we've got to dance with to actually be competitive and stop what could potentially become a bigger disparity between the top 7 and the rest of the league?
I pretty much alluded to this when I said that instead of a gambling company, there should be some other companies which would, be a little bit more ethical.
Yeah,
And it is a really sad trend, when you have all these gambling companies trying to get more and more of a foothold in the game.
yeah,
And, obviously there is a connection between gambling and sports and so forth. And as you've rightly mentioned, Craig, it does ruin a great deal many lives. And it's a sad state of affairs. And the only solution to this would be for some other companies to, try and re-emerge and try and say, what, we're going to pick up the slack. Or the FA are also going to have to clamp down and say, what, we're not going to let anyone, any of these companies try and get a foothold into the game. It's difficult though, because as you've said,
yeah,
there is a great deal of money involved, and obviously, the pay that's on offer, you can't necessarily turn it down. But there has to be a way around it. There has to be, if the FA, for example, were to try and issue a directive which says that no gambling companies will be allowed to get a foothold in the game, then I'm sure that there will be some other companies who wouldn't mind, trying to get a share of the market. Let's
Mhm.
say, for example, you mentioned Ipswich, who are still sponsored by Kieran, and they obviously have had that from their days in the in the Championship, and now, of course, they're back, and of course, it's wonderful to see them back. They're founder members of the Premiership. I loved watching them in the early seasons when, with the likes of Chris Kiwami and John Walk, they were playing some really, really good football, and they were challenging for good honours at the time. Craig Forrest as well, the Canadian international, was another fine player.
Mhm.
But and then, of course, since then they were relegated, and they came back into the Premiership, and then got relegated again. And it's good to see them back, and they've still maintained their sponsor. And Kieran, I don't think it's a gambling company by any means. I think it has a little bit more of an Asian connection to it, but not gambling. So, you know, let's say you are a Premiership team.
Yeah.
I'm sure there will be some other companies that would love to get a piece of that. So for
Oh,
me, it's a question of the FA issuing a directive saying that no gambling companies should be allowed to try and get a foothold in the game. I realize that it's easier said than done, and obviously money talks and everyone shuts their trap a gob and listens. But you know, there has to be a way around it. And if the FA were to take a moral stance on this issue and say, you know what, we're not going to have let this happen, then that could be of help. The problem is, though, Craig, that you're still going to have Ladbrokes and William Hill and other companies, even if they're not
yeah.
sponsoring. That's not going to stop them in any way from stop people from engaging in gambling. And so, do you end up making gambling completely illegal? Do you end up having a stronger, tougher crackdown on everything? It's another can of worms which has to be opened, basically. And maybe, in the UK, if I'm correct, if you win money in the lottery, it's not subject to taxes. So maybe if there were a change
Mm.
to that system where the UK would end up taxing winnings by a certain amount, that would probably be better for the government, more money in their pockets, which they can spend on the things that people need, and maybe it'll help a little bit more.
So yeah, of course. They it ruins a lot of people's lives gambling, and that is a big thing. Now, let's look at this company that has taken the sponsorship deal over from Dapperbet, BJ88. So they are a company that does not operate in the UK. Now, it's quite interesting. The countries that they actually operate in is Cambodia, Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia, South Korea, Bangladesh, where they're actually from and founded, India, Pakistan, Nepal, and Brazil. Now, there's quite a lot of important stuff in that. Why I've read out where they're actually got where they allow people to gamble from, because gambling is illegal in a number of those locations. But to enable them to actually operate in the UK, TGP, which is the parent company, actually are based on the Isle of Man. Now, a lot of it's known as the Isle of Betting. Of course, it's based between the Irish Sea and Liverpool, as everybody will know. But they also have had W88. They've also had KN as well. So there's a number of companies that they've actually run. And how they do this is through a licensed UK facing white label site. So not intended to attract UK customers, but allows the gambling brand to advertise in the UK. So hence the reason what they've done here. Um, Firstly, is it how much of a concern is it, considering, okay, the money is very good that AFC Bournemouth will be getting, but how much of a concern is it that they are allowing, a sponsor to sponsor the front of the shirts who are allowing gambling in countries where it is actually illegal?
It is definitely, a bit of a big issue, and this is something that could very well end up becoming a legal issue for a few years down the line.
Mhm.
And this is, of course, where the issue of due diligence comes in.
Yeah.
Um, Obviously, with the issue of Brexit having reared its ugly head, the UK has now seen it fit to try to sort of branch itself out into other
Mhm.
markets, including Asia and maybe to some extent the Americas or what have you. But the more and more I hear about this, Craig, the more I think that it's probably not the. It's not. It sounds. I don't want to say sketchy necessarily, but it doesn't exactly sound ideal in many ways. And
Mhm.
there are some legal ramifications over here. And why they would see it fit to want to try to come in like this is, I mean, obviously they want the exposure, but why Bournemouth would agree to this is beyond me. Yes, they need the cash. I mean, the club. I wouldn't say the club is strapped for cash, but certainly the money that's being provided, you can't sniff at that.
Yeah.
But when you don't have regulations against the type of companies that can come in and sponsor a football team, you are going to have these issues. And I like the way you mentioned that in many of the countries where that are involved, gambling is illegal. So it begs the question: why would you want to establish headquarters or company or sort of why would you want to establish headquarters in those company headquarters in those countries? And maybe is it due to the lack of red tape? Maybe they just want a brick and mortar establishment while a sort of a base, while they sort of cater to um, clientele away from those nations. And that's what makes the whole thing sound a little bit murky to me. And that's one of the reasons why I don't really think that Bournemouth should have accepted this deal. So if there are going to be some political ramifications later on down the line, and maybe the company itself could be subject to a great deal of investigations or what have you, would it have been worth it? And then now you have a situation where you have to try and look for another sponsor. Now, of
Mm.
course, there is a precedent. Barcelona, of course, and this is completely different. Different. For a long time, they were cash strapped, and they are still cash strapped. I mean, they are so
Yeah.
far in debt, it is literally scary. And I believe they're sponsored by UNICEF of
Yes, they
all
are.
entities. So I'm sure that Bournemouth's financial health is a little bit much better than Barcelona. I mean, you can't really compare. And of course, with the Barcelona
Mm.
connection, if memory serves me right, Murara Neto was the reserve goalkeeper there, I think. I'll have to confirm that.
Yeah, he
But,
was.
but well, thank you very much indeed, mate. But I just think that there has to be some common sense applied over here.
Mhm.
And for me, the fact that Bournemouth were just so willing to, jump into this, it's not for nothing that, as the legendary song goes, only fools rush in.
Mhm.
So I don't want to criticize anyone, but it does look as though that there was no real thought attached to it, and it might affect them in the long run, and that's what really hurts me in many ways. So hopefully, now that the deal has been done, it may only be for about a year or so, but I would like to think that there will be some, you know, investigation, some sort of checking, and so forth,
Mhm.
some ratification, as it were. And once it's taken care of, everything can be better dealt with. But it doesn't sound too good for me, and that's something which can be of concern. And of course, segueing back into the issue of betting companies getting more and more of a foothold in the game, you know, you'd like to think that eventually that will all come to an end. We have to choose some other companies. I did. I think I might have mentioned backstage, or maybe now, that
Yeah.
Waitrose was for a long time a sponsor of the England cricket team. So there is a way. There is
Yeah.
a way by which you can get some other companies to, come in and sponsor football teams and provide a great deal of exposure and some cash. But until we find more and more people who are willing to do that and get a piece of the action, you know, we're going to struggle with this, and we're going to continue having betting companies trying their best to get a foothold on it, and that's all the more saddening for you and me.
And one thing, of course, last year, and I don't want to go too much more into this, but last season, of course, Ivan Toney is banned.
Mm-hmm.
Is banned. Whatever Bournemouth fans think of Ivan Toney, he is a professional footballer, and professional footballers are asked not to put bets on games which either they are participating in, or they could be affected. Uh, their actions could affect. Now the thing is that means that really it's a blanket ban across the whole of football, and Ivan Toney was rightly banned for a period of time. Was it too long? I feel maybe it was, a little bit harsh. However, he's come back into the Brentford side, and of course, he's wearing a shirt with Hollywood bets on it. And this is really, it doesn't feel, and this isn't Brentford's fault. They've taken the deal because it's the most profitable for Brentford. Like we've taken this deal because it's the most profitable for us. But this is also a problem because, of course, backstage we were talking about Bruce Grobbelaar, and I'd love you to go through that story again
With
for all the
pleasure, with
listeners.
pleasure.
But this is a massive problem. It's a massive, massive problem because players are getting involved. There's also other people and other individuals across the whole of the game that are, entangled in things. Entangled in things. Mark Bowen, our former AFC Wimbledon director, and also director of football at Reading now. He is also entailed and has been charged by the EFL for effectively gambling whilst he's in a position. Sportsmen shouldn't be doing this, but then sportsmen are wearing it on the front of their shirts and promoting it to people like me and you to actually do it ourselves. I wouldn't do it. Like I say, I've never had a gambling problem, but there is people out there that do.
Right. Okay. Well, at your request, let me take a look at the story involving Brucey. So,
Mhm.
this took place sometime in the mid-90s, and by that time, uh, he had in fact left Liverpool to move to Southampton,
Yeah.
and so the allegations were like this: he was accused by the Sun of match fixing during his time at Liverpool to benefit a betting syndicate after being caught on videotape discussing match fixing. And along with another goalkeeper, Wimbledon's Hans Sagers,
Yeah.
and the ex-Wimbledon striker John Fashanu, who joined Aston Villa, having recently signed from the Dons, they were discussing business with a Malaysian businessman by the name of Heng Swan Lim. Now, despite the allegations, Grobbelaar and Sagers were allowed to continue playing, while Fashanu retired from playing less than a year after being charged. Brucey pleaded not guilty, claiming that he was only gathering evidence with the intent of taking it to the police. After 2 consecutive trials, in both of which the jury couldn't agree on a verdict, he and his co-defendants were cleared in November 1997. So Grobbelaar later sued the Sun for libel and was awarded a hefty sum of £85,000. But after the Sun appealed, the case was taken to the House of Lords, where it was found that although the specific allegations had not been proved, there was adequate evidence of dishonesty. And this is the ruling that was given by Lord Bingham of Cornhill. The tort of defamation protects those whose reputations have been unlawfully injured. It affords little or no protection to those who have or deserve to have no reputation deserving of legal protection. Until the 9th of November 1994, when the newspaper published its first articles about him, the appellant's public reputation was unblemished. But he had in fact acted in a way in which no decent or honest footballer would act, and in a way which could, if not exposed and stamped on, undermine the integrity of a game which earns the loyalty and support of millions. So the Lord slashed his award to a single pound from 85,000, the lowest libel damages possible under the law, and ordered him to pay the Sun's legal costs, which are estimated at £500,000. And so, because poor old Brucey was unable to pay the costs, he was declared bankrupt. So he still continued to play and didn't retire until he was eventually cleared of his involvement in match fixing. But obviously, the whole saga affected him. And after leaving England, I mean, he was still playing in the English leagues with the likes of Plymouth Argyle, Oxford United, Sheffield Wednesday, Oldham Athletic, Chesham United, playing just one or two games here and there. But then he returned to um, South Africa not too long afterwards, and also had spells managing the Zimbabwe national team, and also managed South African giants Supersport United and Hellenic. But he obviously he did come back to the UK to coach a number of clubs, and also hoped to one day return to Anfield as the manager of Liverpool FC. And last I heard, he's now, of course, the goalkeeping coach with Norwegian club Uegarden FK. So obviously, that particular saga from back in the day was, you could say, an introduction to the issue of match fixing in football, and the fact that some fairly high-profile players were involved at the time. I mean, many of us remember Fashanu as a star striker. Sagers was a more than decent goalkeeper. Brucey was probably the biggest fish in that caught in that net, as it were. So, the memory of that would probably, in theory, make people think twice about getting involved. And so for Tony to do all of that, it really is kind of shameful in many ways. He should be paid good money by Brentford, and I think Brentford have now made it clear that they're willing to cut their losses with him, and he should be able to secure a move to another club. Whether or not Arsenal will be willing to take him, I don't know. That's something for Mikel Arteta to decide. But that is something which will have to be looked into. And this shouldn't just be an opportunity for education. It's another reminder that if unchecked, gambling and its entire, tentacles, as it were, will pretty much spoil the game in many ways. So that is why people have got to be a little bit smarter about everything. And, the FA also have got to, get their hands out from underneath their backsides and do a lot more to protect the game, as it were. And if that means adopting regulations to prevent betting companies from becoming sponsors, I say so be it.
Well, it is going to be outlawed in 2 years' time. And I'll tell you what, so, why that story means so much is because, of course, that was an era where sports, betting companies weren't on the front of shirts. They weren't on the front of shirts at all. It was, Draper Tools, for example, Sanderson. I'm trying to think of other ones. 1-to-1, Danker, JVC, Sega, Commodore. That was the era. That was the sort of sponsors that you would get then. You would get Strongbow, you would get the Carlsberg, you would get alcohol sponsors, but at the same time, you wouldn't have all these gambling sponsors. It is going to be outlawed in 2 years' time. And really, this is the final question on this bit. And, what I'd like to, and this is a real open debate. When that actually happens, so 2 years down the line, imagine we're there now. Gambling sponsors have gone. How do we stop it becoming the big seven? Because Emirates and Etihad will sponsor Arsenal and Manchester City respectively. Standard Chartered will probably stay with Liverpool. Man United will probably be able to attract a decent sponsor, as will Spurs. Chelsea will probably be able to do that as well. So you've got all these clubs, who are able, and Newcastle, of course, Seller, the Saudis don't seem to be going anywhere apart, of course, Amanda Stavel has decided to call it a day there, but the thing is the Saudi consortium and not going anywhere. So you've got those top seven. How do we stop it becoming such a big disparity between those seven and the rest of the league, who were having to rely, all right, Brighton and Ipswich, Ipswich's is probably quite a small deal. Brighton's is a long-term sponsorship, which, I'm quite envious of, like I said earlier on. But let's say the rest of the teams we all rely, Wolves, Crystal Palace, ourselves, Nottingham Forest, we're all relying on these gambling sponsors. Are we going to be all fishing round a pond which is going to be full of companies which can't offer anywhere near what these gambling sponsors would do? Is it going to devalue the league? Is it going to, cause issues further down that, we are going to become, nobody can break in? Aston Villa, for example, finished in the Champions League spaces last season. In certain places they're going to go to, they're not going to be able to have a sponsor on their shirt because it is a betting sponsor. How do we stop this becoming, you know, the haves and the have-nots and a big gap in the middle?
That is a question, Craig, which I only wish I could answer. But you know me, I'm not a magician.
Mm-hmm.
And, back in the day, it was the electronics companies that really ruled the roost.
Yeah.
Sharp had Manchester United. JVC, of course, had Arsenal back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
Hewlett Packard ended up sponsoring Spurs. Samsung, I believe, was with Chelsea and maybe one other company. But there are several companies which could even find a way back if they still had the money and the wherewithal to want to do so. I just suppose that maybe in the cases of those companies, it could be once bitten, twice shy, or maybe they just don't have as much capital anymore. Maybe they don't want. Maybe they're probably going to say, they've done their time in the football sphere and they just don't want to do that anymore. But there is going to be a way. And as far as getting rid of the disparity in wealth between the big seven and the other clubs, that is obviously going to be a much longer term issue, and it's not something that's going to be solved overnight.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, when you have teams like Aston Villa and Newcastle who are able to qualify for the Champions League in successive seasons, you would like to think, in theory, that they could give themselves a little bit more exposure. And a team like Aston Villa have won the European Cup / Champions League before Arsenal. Don't forget about Nottingham Forest, who were twice winners back in the days of Brian Clough. I think the only way that we can see a change in the order is for these teams to start earning success again. Now, I realize, of course, that Manchester City have bought their way to success, but you'd also like to think that with the Saudis having come into Newcastle, there will be another team that's rife for being picked up by some rich Middle Eastern conglomerate or royal family. Maybe the UAE could get in on this. Qatar, Bahrain, anyone. So that could be an option. The only problem is the more and more money that's being put into the game, that's also going to bring within itself its own ramifications, its own can of worms. So, look, all I can say right now is that these smaller clubs are going to have to try and find their way to get something. If they can start by appointing some really good quality managers and somehow trying to get some good players like Newcastle, Aston Villa with Unai Emery. Emery, you take a look at the way he's conducting his transfer business, and all you can do is just admire him. And if they end up building on that Champions League success and going further, you just imagine that there'll be more and more clubs who would like to be a part of that. It's not going to be easy though, because you take a look at Leicester, and Chris will tell you, they won the Premiership. They very nearly reached the Champions League semi-finals, FA Cup winners, and they did reach the semi-finals of the Conference League as well under Brendan Rodgers. But then they got relegated, and now they found their way back. And regrettably, Maresca saw it fit to leave Leicester and move to Chelsea. And I'm sure that that would have left Chris and his other Leicester fans feeling fit to be tied. But there is some hope. And all you can do is just wait and watch. But it's something that won't be solved overnight, I'm afraid.
Yeah, most definitely. And the thing is, he's a gambling sponsor. I've never been a fan of them. When I went over to India and the UAE last year, I was conscious of wearing my Bournemouth shirts, and it shouldn't be like that. This one I could wear MSP Capital. It'll mean nothing, but Daffer bet, would it be frowned upon? Now, the thing is both India and the UAE were very, very accepting, of me wearing a Bournemouth shirt. They didn't really see the betting side, but some countries that you go to might not be. So I am looking forward to gambling sponsorship being made illegal in football in the long run in 2 years'
Yes.
time. But I believe that the rest of football is going to have to come into line. And I feel that transfer figures are probably going to have to go down, and things are going to have to, get back into a normal reality, because I think clubs like ourselves, who, our attendance revenue is dwarfed by this sponsorship deal, is dwarfed by the money that we get from the Premier League. The Premier League probably gets paid in money from gambling companies. The Championship, EFL, what happens there? Of course, it's called the Sky Bet EFL at the moment. So what happens there? And of course, there's a lot of clubs that are earning a lot less. So there's a lot of questions for the authorities to do before it comes in 2 years' time. But I'm looking forward to that. I think final topic for today, because I tell you what, it's a big topic, this gambling thing, and I think we've covered it in so much detail tonight. So thank you for doing that, Manny. But let's talk about this next England manager, because I honestly think that Eddie Howe, if he is offered this role, I think he will take it with both hands. The main reason being is because of the players that we've got in the England setup at the moment. We probably have, and I know Chris doesn't agree with me on this, but I think we've got our golden generation at this moment in time. But secondly, how many more times is it going to come up? And I was reading something earlier on, because Harry Redknapp, good friend Harry Redknapp, spoke to Talksport, and he said just that. How many times is the England job going to turn up for Eddie Howe? Firstly, do you think Eddie will get offered it? B, do you think he would be sensible or silly to leave Newcastle for it? And C, what could he do in the England setup? Because I personally think the greatest story of all could be going from -17 with ourselves in League Two to winning the World Cup, which, wow, he would have completed football, wouldn't he?
Well, maybe not quite like Lionel Messi did, but you could say that. You could say that. And I'm sure if we were to take a look at Alf Ramsey's managerial career, apart from that World Cup, he probably didn't. I don't know if he did very much. This is why I've got Wikipedia with me. I'm ready to stand corrected if need be. Now, the headlines about Eddie Howe were that he doesn't really seem too eager necessarily to leave right now. And I stand corrected. As Ipswich Town manager, he was the second division winner and first division winner in consecutive seasons. But pretty much that was as good as it got for him. But with England, obviously, he had all his, greatest successes, and that's the way it ended up being. But with regards to Eddie Howe, there is some pressure on him, mind you, and a large number of fans have made it crystal clear that they do not want to see Eddie Howe continue managing unless he's able to take the team even further. And there has to be a little bit of prudence applied here, because Newcastle, mental flatulence, please forgive me. Newcastle, it does happen. Newcastle, for long, were sort of in the doldrums, as it were. I wouldn't say doldrums necessarily, but they weren't exactly able to be in the upper echelons for quite some time. And the days of, Kevin Keegan leading the team to 2 consecutive second runners-up finishes in the Premier League were all long gone. They did, of course, make the Champions League some years back. And, of course, under Eddie Howe, they scaled that peak magnificently, but then had a bit of a drop-off. Injury-induced, it must be said, but a drop-off nonetheless. And so there is some pressure on him. to try and deliver in this third season. And the Saudi owners also, if he was offered the job and he would like to, he would take it. I don't know if they would necessarily stand in his way, but they'd also want to make sure they get a really good replacement who can take the team to a much higher level. And there is a great deal of potential in that team now that Sandro Tonali's ban has been, is finished. He should be able to come back into the team and take the team to a better level. And I think it's fair to say that they missed him a great deal. But I'm not too sure that Eddie Howe would necessarily himself want to try and leave Newcastle immediately. I understand that there is a huge pull for the job, but I'm not too sure that it would necessarily be, in his opinion, the right thing to do right now. And there would also be the question, of course, as I said, would the owners be willing to let him leave without getting a good replacement in? And I'll tell you what, some of the names that have been mentioned to replace Gareth Southgate have not really been very inspiring. There are one or two that I do like. One that I did rate earlier and mentioned on several cherry picking streams, but whose stock probably has fallen a little bit in recent times. Another one who I do believe would be a kind of Luis de la Fuente style manager. In fact, if you were to put some glasses on this bloke, he'd almost be a doppelganger, as it were.
I was thinking, as soon as you said that, I thought, Lee Carsley with glasses on. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
Mr. Carsley. Mr. Carsley.
He's a very good. It's a very good thought, that one, because the thing is he is somebody who will know these young players inside out, and
yes,
it's that continuity which Luis de la Fuente has got in the Spanish setup. So there is that. I'd love to see Eddie get it, and I would love to see him take it. Now, I've spoken to so many people about this, and one of the big things as well that has been said all these years is Eddie likes the 9 to 5, or what he would, what Steve Fletcher's turned around and said to me was like 6 a.m. in the morning to about 8 o'clock in the evening. That's what Eddie Howe's hours that he chose to work. I'd love to see Eddie Howe take it though, and I do agree with Harry that I think this opportunity is not going to come around again very soon. I think the FA will make the right decision.
yes.
I think they will make the right decision. The other big question, and I tell you what, let's end it on this one. Should the England manager, I've ruined that now, haven't I? You know where I'm going with it now, Manny. Should
Yes,
the
I do.
England manager be English?
No, not necessarily.
Agree.
And this is something which I'm really, really, sick of having to say, because we have had foreign managers before.
Yeah.
I think hindsight will probably look back on Sven-Göran Eriksson's tenure a little bit more kindly. It was the players who let him down more than anything else. Since then, of course, we had the Wally with the Brolly, Steve McLaren. The Italian Sergeant Major was an absolute disaster.
Yeah.
And I think it's fair to say that with the FA, they do feel it's a case of once bitten, twice shy. Hiring a foreign manager would just not be worth the while. It was also interesting. I want to shout out another Arsenal-related content creator who goes by the name of Diesel. I don't know if that's his real name, but he was having a stream last night where he was talking about Pep Guardiola.
Yeah.
And I believe he was Barcelona manager at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Arsene Wenger was Arsenal manager. Jack Wilshere, lovely Bournemouth connection. I'm glad I mentioned that. He actually, in that particular game, had an absolute stormer of a game as Arsenal beat Barcelona, a memorable win. Mm-hmm. When Guardiola was asked what he thought of Jackie's performance, he said, "He did well, but I've got similar players like him in my in the reserves of Barcelona." And so the reason why Guardiola might not even want to leave Manchester City and go to England is because maybe, aside from the likes of maybe Phil Foden and to some extent Cole Palmer, John Stones perhaps, he probably doesn't rate too many of England's players. And that sort of segues into how Jude Bellingham didn't necessarily have the best Euros apart from that bicycle kick. And obviously, the subsequent celebration was very distasteful. And then, you saw him throw a few strops here and there. This is one bloke who's had a lot of things happen to him far too quickly and will need to learn to be a little bit more humble. But back to Guardiola, he probably doesn't rate England as a collective. We're a group of individuals, but not really a collective. And that's going to be the problem. And so the new manager who comes in will have to take a bit of a hard line and try and make some really hard changes. What was good about De La Fuente with Spain was that he made it crystal clear that some of the older veterans no longer had a place in the team. So Sergio Ramos was told, I don't care about your accomplishments. You don't suit my way of playing, and so you will no longer be considered for selection. And you have to say that it proved to be a masterstroke, as the players that he had under his disposal went on to do well for him, including Mark Cucurella, who I thought would be a bit of a weak link, but he got better as the tournament went on. So the thing about Southgate and his squad selection, he was happy to select younger players and dispose of the likes of Jordan Henderson, Marcus Rashford, and Jackie Grealish. But they were all just to cover up his own tactical ineptitude. Yeah. And with the possible exception of Mainu, who probably froze in the final, in my opinion, the younger players either didn't offer enough or never even got their chances. And so if you want to select younger players, you damn well have got to give them their chance and play them in their best positions. Southgate wasn't willing to do that. I think one of the things that Lee Carsley would do if he were given the job would be to tell Harry Kane, Harry, mate, you've been a brilliant servant, but I think you're starting to decline a bit, and we need to give some younger, fitter strikers the opportunity. So I'm going to give you 2 friendly internationals so that you can earn 100 caps, but you're already England's leading goal scorer. You've taken us to 2 major tournament finals and a World Cup semi-final, but we have to move on from you. And there will be some other older players who will be also given their pink slips and told that their services will no longer be required. Some of them might already have their pink slips already. So this is why I would like to see Lee Carsley get the job. And the thing about Eddie Howe, I don't know if he's worked with too many of the players in that setup, be it at Bournemouth or Newcastle. I don't know if he has. Maybe Callum Wilson to an extent, but then that's probably only one outlier. Yeah. Aaron Ramsdale may be another, but again, will he necessarily become the number one once Pickford retires? I think Pickford might end up retiring after the 26 World Cup, should we qualify, of course. But several of these youngsters have worked with Carsley and were part of that team which won the European Championships under Carsley when he had Ashley Cole, among others, in his coaching setup. So for me, that makes some good sense. My only fear is that could be more of an interim selection. Jurgen Klopp's a no-go. He's already decided to take a break, and I do not see him wanting to come back. Tuchel would still be a good shout. But apart from that, some of the other names, Craig, were just depressing. And that's one of the reasons why the FA are going to have to be very careful when they pick their man. If Eddie does get it, I will back him. I will wish him nothing but the best. And I'm sure he will put a lot of effort into the job. I just don't know if he will necessarily be the right person for the job, but time will tell.
Most definitely. Most definitely. Well, I think that's all we've got time for, but Manny, a pleasure as always.
Always, mate.
We are going to make a few changes. So me and Manny are going to be starting on new episodes of This Is Football. Coming up very, very soon on this channel. So keep your eyes peeled. First episode, maybe next week. You keep your eyes peeled. Cherry picking will be continuing. Manny will be on a number of those as well. Love to get you involved on
Absolutely.
those. But yeah, This Is Football. It's going to be our own baby. This is something that is going to be about everything Premier League. Because it's not just AFC Bournemouth we want to hear about, Manny, and we want to hear about a lot more now.
I'm sure you'll get that chance, and I'm looking forward to being a part of that.
Definitely, mate, definitely. As before, hit the like, the subscribe, and the bell button below. It helps this channel to grow. If you're listening on Spotify, go onto YouTube, search us, give us a sub, and also follow us on Spotify if you're watching on YouTube as well. But until the next one, up the cherries. We'll see you soon. Thank you for joining us.
The Talksport Fan Network.
The ultimate on-demand destination for the UK's best fan-led football podcasts.
Want authentic supporter insight on all things Bournemouth? Follow Up the Cherries in all departments on the Talksport Fan Network.
Club-dedicated content created by the fans, for the fans.
Search Talksport Fan Network.